Welcome to The Point. This is a series of programs basically on the human body, but today we're going to talk about plants and photosynthesis. This is a series of programs. If you've got any comments, we'd love to hear from you. Please send us some comments to info@revelationtv.com, whether they're good points or bad points. If you want to ask me any questions, I'll answer your questions personally, or try to. We also have a website. It's freechristianteaching.org. All of these programs you can watch them free, plus also you can order free DVDs. So I want to get straight back to the miracle of trees, plants, and photosynthesis. And I want to tell you that the reason I'm talking about this is because we are completely dependent on the trees and the plants. We need oxygen. If we don't have oxygen, if our brain doesn't get oxygen for 10 seconds, we're unconscious, and if our brain doesn't get oxygen for 4 minutes, we are dead, seriously dead. So that's how much we need the trees and the plants. So let's start with Genesis chapter 1, verse 11. And it says, "Then God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth, and it was so." Now, what I'm going to do is show you some beautiful nature pictures, but what I want you to do is, instead of admiring the beautiful nature, to think what you're actually looking at are chemical factories created by God to make oxygen, which you desperately need, cannot survive without, and also sugar and starch, and also fix carbon for us, because our bodies are partly made of carbon, and it comes from the plants. And of course, Jesus said in Matthew 6, verse 28, so we're going to do what Jesus said. He said, "Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, and yet I say to you that even Solomon in his glory was not arrayed like one of these." Now have a look at just, I think it's about 11 pictures, and we're just going to look through them quickly and just see what God's factories actually look like. Just amazing pictures of what God's factories of nature look like. Well, everything green that you see has a chemical in it called chlorophyll, and in that chlorophyll there's a process going on called photosynthesis, which is a really complicated process to make oxygen and starch and fix carbon so that you and I can live. Without trees and the plants, we would not be able to survive. It's called a symbiotic process. The plants can't manage without us, and we can't manage without the plants. So we all look at those scenes and think, well, isn't that beautiful? It is beautiful, because God's factories are beautiful, but that, let me tell you, is a factory. That's what it is. It's a factory to make oxygen and sugar and starch for you and me. That's what we're looking at. And I think they're really beautiful. I could actually spend the next half an hour talking about just showing you pretty pictures of plants and trees and flowers, but I want you to get a feeling that you're looking at a factory, because you've never probably thought of a plant as a factory before. And that's why I want you to think of the plant as a factory, because that's exactly what it is. Right, so there we are. There's the lilies of the field, and we're going to do what Jesus said and consider the lilies of the field. So let's actually think now about the construction of trees and plants. Now, they're actually very carefully made. The main part of the tree of all plants is the leaf. We're going to be talking about leaves later on. But the structure of the plant is to hold the leaf up. Now, what you're looking at there is some tree in a high wind. And all plants and flowers and trees are very beautiful, but it's easy to forget they're actually feats of engineering. They look very delicate, but in fact they're very, very strong, and they can endure extreme heat, cold, and wind. If you'd like to look at the next picture, it's daffodils in rain. Now, daffodils they look delicate, but actually they're not, because if you have a thunderstorm pounding down on those daffodils, you would expect them to be squashed flat, but actually they're not, because they're actually, for their size, they're very, very strong. actually far stronger than you and me. Now, I want just to briefly look at the structure of a tree, but basically it's the same for all plants. They are basically engineered with a special material which you're very familiar with called wood, which is very ingeniously designed to combine strength and flexibility. They respond to their environment and actually change their design according to their environment. For example, if you go to a wind-blown place in the Lake District in England, you'll see that a lot of the trees are wind-blown so that they can accommodate the prevailing wind. The whole point of the trees and the branches and everything else is to support the canopy of leaves, which is where the real factory of the plant actually is. And the thing about wood is it's a very unique material. It's basically a rigid material, but it's flexible as well. Otherwise, the trees would droop under their weight. It has to be strong so that the sheer forces of the wind don't snap the trunk and the branches. By the way, it must be able to repair itself, which it does just as well as the human body. Bones get broken and they mend themselves. Well, trees are the same. You can break a branch and it'll mend itself. So wood has to be tough, so when the tree gets damaged, it doesn't shatter. Now, there are other materials which God could have used, but he didn't. For example, plastic isn't strong enough. Bricks are too weak. Glass is far too brittle. Steel is far too heavy. But wood has the best engineering properties of all material. And it's all to do with the arrangement of the cells inside. Over 90% of the cells in wood are long, thin tubes that are closely packed together, pointing along the branches and the trunk. And it helps them to transport water up and down the trunk to the leaves, mostly up. And this is ideal for providing support because they point in the direction in which the wood is stressed. Because mostly trees have to resist bending forces. Now their branches have to resist being bent down under their own weight, and they have to resist being bent sideways by the wind. And when it's windy, one side of the tree is compressed and the other side is stretched, which actually puts a lot of stress on the tree, but the tree is actually very good at withstanding those stresses, unlike the other materials I mentioned. The cells of the trees are hollow. The tubular structures are strong. And by the way, in engineering nowadays, we tend to use tubes. You think of a bicycle, it's made of tubes, isn't it? Now I want to think about something else about the beauty of design. I'm only going to touch on this because I'm going to make a whole program about this. It's called the golden ratio. And for those of you who are familiar with mathematics, you almost certainly heard of pi. It's a mathematical ratio with special properties and aesthetic significance. And we find pi in the human body, in the Ark of the Covenant, in Noah's Ark, and snail shells, and the orbit of planets, but we also find it in plants. And here, example, is an example of pi, or the golden ratio, in the world of plants. Here's a pi in that little coil. There's another pi there, the golden ratio in a plant. There's a slide coming up of a rose, and I don't know if you can see, drawn in is a sort of a curl, that's pi, or the golden ratio, because actually roses are beautifully proportioned in the fashion which is most attractive to us. And I think we've got one more slide of a sunflower. Again, that's the golden ratio. Now, this is such an interesting subject. As I say, I will be doing a whole program about this. I want really to talk about photosynthesis, which is the main substance of what plants are all about. You see, the Earth's atmosphere is mostly, or 80% nitrogen approximately. Oxygen is about 20 or 21%. But plants take up carbon dioxide and release oxygen during photosynthesis. where have we got to now? If we can perhaps move on to the next slide, then that's exactly what happens during photosynthesis. All you need to know is that carbon dioxide and water, in the presence of light, photons of light, manufacture carbohydrate and oxygen with 100% efficiency. They are enormously efficient, our plants. They can take carbon dioxide, which is a waste product from us, and they take some water, and they give off and they produce carbohydrates and oxygen. And they are essential for life. The plants, they give us food to eat, oxygen to breathe. They breathe in carbon dioxide, which is a toxic gas which we exhale. They protect the soil from wind and water runoff, and they prevent erosion, and they release water into the air during photosynthesis. So next thing we have to ask ourselves, well, what actually is photosynthesis? What actually is photosynthesis? Well, it's a process by which plants use the energy from sunlight to produce sugar and oxygen from water and carbon dioxide. And we, as I said, we need that oxygen, desperately need that oxygen. We can't survive without it, because in our cells, in our mitochondria, we have something called the Krebs cycle. In our human bodies, in the mitochondria, we have the Krebs cycle. I'll be sending a whole program talking about the Krebs cycle. And all you need to know is that the two things that that Krebs cycle requires to produce energy are oxygen and sugar, which are the very things that plants provide for us. Let's actually look at a leaf. We're going to look at leaves and leaf structure. I'm not going to go through all the detailed anatomy of a leaf. They're very complex. They're as complicated as humans. And remember that they are made with DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, their genetic code. Each single strand of DNA has 3 billion codes. And that's how all the various structures within a plant are so carefully and beautifully made, just like we are. But they are fantastically efficient power stations for generating oxygen and food from carbon dioxide and water. And they're the only power factories that can do this with such efficiency. Let's look at something you're familiar with, which is a solar panel on a roof. A solar panel on a roof is a man-made structure to make electrical energy out of the sunlight. Let me tell you, it's only 22% efficient. 78% of the energy from the sun is wasted in those solar cells. That is quite unlike leaves, which are 100% efficient. Now, if we look at the anatomy of a plant, water enters the root and is transported up to the leaves through specialized plant cells, which are called xylem. And in the leaves are all covered with a waxy cuticle, but in the leaves are little openings called stomata or stomata. They're little openings which are very carefully controlled to let gas in and out. God has carefully designed all leaves to have these stomata to allow this gas, oxygen and carbon dioxide, to come in and go out of the leaf. And they're very, very carefully designed, and there are special mechanisms to ensure that the little openings in the stomata only open and close at exactly the right time. Now we're going to talk about light, because leaves are all about using light to make oxygen and sugar for us. Now, light is actually photons moving in a waveform, and it moves in what we call wavelengths. And we didn't go into the detailed physics of it, but all light has different wavelengths. Now, what plants are very good at, because of the various substances of which, the pigments of which they're made, is collecting all the different wavelengths of light. There's a spectrum of light. Now, actually, that's the electromagnetic spectrum of light, but you and I, all of us humans, we can only see a very limited spectrum of light from violet to red. But actually, there's a much broader spectrum of light outside that. There's the short wavelengths, the ultraviolet wavelengths, and then the long wavelengths, including all the infrared ones. There are lots of gamma rays and X-rays and all sorts of other rays. But the point is that the visible spectrum, the plants are very, very efficient at collecting virtually all of these rays. Now, I'm going to tell you something which will surprise you. Plants are not green. Well, that's a funny thing to say, isn't it? Plants are not green. What I mean to say by that is that plants actually absorb all the wavelengths except green. They reflect green, and that is why they look green. So they do that by using a pigment called chlorophyll and another pigment called carotene, which is basically similar. The details don't matter. What you do need to know is that they pick up virtually all the electromagnetic spectrum, but they reflect green. So that is why when you look at everything in the plant world, it all looks green. It's not because they are green, it's because they are reflecting the one color that they don't actually absorb. That's a strange thing. And now we're going to look at the structure of chloroplasts and photosynthetic membranes. Again, it's like human anatomy. It's very, very complicated, intricately, beautifully, carefully designed, because they got DNA, a long chain of genetic codes, to make sure that all this happens perfectly. There's a thing called a thicolloid, which is the structural unit of photosynthesis, and they're stacked like pancakes in stacks, collectively known as grana, and the areas between the grana are referred to stroma. I'm not going to go through all the detailed anatomy of plants. We don't have to. It's actually called botany. What I would like to emphasize is DNA in plants. Now, you are familiar that you've got DNA in you, deoxyribonucleic acid. What you possibly didn't realize that so have plants. They have the exact, well, it's not exactly the same, but very, very similar deoxyribonucleic acid, this spiral of genetic information, and every single cell within a plant has been carefully and beautifully designed by God, and its genetic code is within the DNA of the plant. The DNA carries a complete blueprint of the whole plant in their DNA. Now I'm going to let you just have a look at some of the pictures of photosynthesis. Now, people actually spend the whole of their botanical degree just studying photosynthesis, and some people spend the whole of their lifetime studying photosynthesis. What I'm going to tell you is that there are basically two steps in the photosynthesis process. There's the so-called light reaction and the so-called dark reaction. All you need to know is that light comes into the plant in the form of photons, and water and oxygen converts ADP, the low energy molecule, into ATP. That's in the light reaction. And then in the dark reaction, the so-called Calvin-Benson cycle, carbon dioxide is processed, and you get sugar or starches out of that reaction. Basically, what's actually happening is not only is the plant producing oxygen and more water, but it is also fixing carbon from the atmosphere. So the atmosphere is full of carbon dioxide, and actually the plants split carbon dioxide into basic carbon, and carbon is one of the main things that you and I and all plants are made out of. So it's a really, really complicated process. And I know that the evolutionists want us to think that plants will happen by chance. They are at least as complicated as we are. I'm going to say that again. Plants are at least as complicated as we are. There's another process called the light independent process. It's the so-called dark reaction. And another process called chemiosmosis. And then there's photostem 1 and photostem 2. So I'm not trying to bamboozle you with lots of botany. What I am trying to point out to you that when we look at plants and trees and flowers, we are not looking at simple structures. We are looking at incredibly complex structures, amazing factories designed by God with DNA in every single cell, their entire makeup, to do this amazing thing that we desperately need. They make for us oxygen and sugars and take away from us that toxic gas which we must get rid of, called carbon dioxide. It's acid, and we cannot cope with acid in our bodies. So we can't live without the plants. The plants are absolutely vital to us. Now, I'm going to show you a picture now of a man-made factory. Here's a nuclear factory made by man for making electricity. This is actually in Japan, and this is a typical nuclear fission factory. I'm going to be talking about nuclear fusion and nuclear fission at a later time. The sun uses nuclear fusion, but we haven't managed to do that. So what we do is we split atoms using nuclear fission. And let me tell you something about nuclear fission. It produces lots of waste, lots of radioactive waste. It's very wasteful. It's actually quite dangerous. Not trying to frighten you, but let me show you the next picture. This is God's factory. This is God's factory for making plants. This is God's power plants for making food and oxygen for us. Can you see the difference between a man-made structure, which is not very efficient using nuclear fission, and God's beautiful design, photosynthesis, which produces far, far more oxygen and far more sugar and starch than we'll ever going to need. What a difference. Amazing, amazing difference. Now, I want to finish by just quoting a couple of scriptures. 3 scriptures, actually. Psalm 53, it says, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God." I do wish some of these people who insist that everything happened by chance would study either the human body or plants or the sun or almost anything and just work it out for themselves that it is so complex, there is no way that it could happen by chance. So I would say to all these people who come up to me and say, and write to me from all over the world, even set up websites about me from all over the world to say that I'm an idiot. No, they're wrong. The fool has said in his heart there is no God. Please study photosynthesis. I'm not suggesting the viewers are foolish. Listen, let me read you another scripture from Isaiah 40, verse 28. "Have you not heard the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, neither faints nor is weary? His understanding is unsearchable." What we have described is just mind-blowing in complexity and amazing. It is miraculous. It is totally miraculous. I studied botany for A-level. I've been studying botany as a hobby since then. And let me tell you, this is just amazing. One more scripture, Isaiah 55. Verse 12, "You will go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and hills will burst forth into song before you, and all the trees of the field will clap their hands." Well, I don't think they're really going to clap their hands, but they are so real, they are so living, it's almost as if they have got hands. So I hope you're enjoying these programs. These programs are a series of programs on the human body, but related things such as photosynthesis, plants, and the sun and other things as well. We're going to talk about fishes and other things. Please send us some information if some contacts or feedback, info@revelationtv.com. And if you're interested in these subjects, you can look at all of the programs at our website, which is www.freechristianteaching.org. You can watch all the DVDs online. They're all 27 minutes long, and you can also order free DVDs. So I do hope that you've got the idea that plants and the whole vegetation world is totally supernatural, created by God, exactly as it says in Genesis chapter 1. There is absolutely no way whatever that happened by chance. They are so complicated, I am blown away by the complexity of it all. We have the most amazing creative God who created not only the plants, but you and me. So thank you for joining us. We'd love to have you on To The Point. Please send us some feedback, and we look forward to seeing you soon on To The Point. God bless you.